Let's start. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are: rook takes knight, pawn takes knight, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn, check, queen takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check, queen to f2, check, queen to f1, check, queen to e3, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to b8, knight to e6, pawn takes knight. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: pawn takes pawn, queen takes rook, queen takes pawn. Checks in this position are: queen to g4, check, queen to g3, check, queen to g2, check, rook to g2, check. The puzzle is solved using rook to g2, check, king to f8, queen takes pawn, e5, pawn takes pawn, queen to e8, queen to h8, check, king to e7, queen to g7, check, king to d8, queen takes rook, check. Let's continue. The threats are: knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn, bishop takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: queen to b3, check. Solution to the puzzle is: queen to b3, check, king to f8, g4, queen to b1, check, rook to c1, queen takes rook, check, bishop takes queen. Another puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are: queen takes pawn, queen takes rook, check, rook takes rook. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes rook, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle: rook takes rook, rook takes rook, king takes rook, queen takes pawn, queen to e1, queen to d3, check, king to g2. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check, pawn takes bishop, queen takes pawn, rook takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check, queen to g1, check. Answer to this puzzle is: bishop takes pawn, check, king takes bishop, rook takes bishop, check, king to f3, rook to e8, rook to e1, queen to d5, check. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are: knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn, check, queen takes pawn, check, queen takes knight. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check, queen to g2, check, queen to h1, check, queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: knight takes pawn, queen takes knight, queen takes queen, check, rook takes queen, rook takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: knight to b5, queen to a5, queen takes knight. Another one. Threats in this position are: rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. Rook to e1, check, rook to b7, check, rook to h1, check, rook to b3, check. Solution to the puzzle is: rook to e1, check, king to c2, rook to e2, check, king to d1, rook to a2, rook to e6, rook to h1, check, rook to e1, rook to a1, check. Another one. Threats in this position are: there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is: king to g5, king to e5, f4, king to e4, f3. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: bishop takes knight, rook takes knight. Checks in this position are: bishop to d6, check, rook to h1, check. Solution to the puzzle is: d5, rook takes pawn, check, king takes rook. Let's continue. Here are the threats: rook takes pawn, knight takes bishop, rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: rook to f7, king to g1, knight to h3, check, bishop takes knight, rook takes queen, king takes rook, rook takes bishop. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen takes pawn, check, rook to e8, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to e8 check, bishop to f8, knight to e4, queen to a1 check, king to h2. Let's continue. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. Checks in puzzle position are queen to h2 check. Answer to this puzzle is queen to g2, queen to d1, queen to h3 check, king to g7, d7. Another one. Threats in this position are bishop takes pawn, queen takes pawn check. Here are the checks. Rook to d1 check, queen to c3 check, queen to d2 check, queen to e2 check, queen takes pawn check, queen to d1 check, queen to c1 check, queen to b1 check. The answer is queen to c3 check, king to e2, rook to d2 check, king to f3, rook takes pawn check, king to g3, queen takes knight check. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are rook takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes knight. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, rook to d8, c6, bishop takes knight. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are bishop takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, queen takes pawn, queen takes knight, queen takes bishop. The checks are queen takes pawn check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop to e5, queen to d7, queen to f4, queen to h3, bishop takes knight. Next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes pawn, rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is rook takes pawn, pawn takes rook, queen takes pawn, queen to b2, bishop to f4 check. Another puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes queen check, queen takes pawn, queen takes pawn. The checks are queen to a6 check, queen to b6 check, queen to c6 check, queen to e8 check, queen takes queen check, rook to h6 check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to e2, king takes knight, rook to h5 check, king to g6, rook takes queen. Another puzzle. Threats in this position are pawn takes pawn. Here are the checks. g6 check. Solution to the puzzle is f3, queen takes bishop check, rook takes queen. Another one. Threats in this position are rook takes pawn check, bishop takes bishop check. The checks are rook takes pawn check, bishop takes bishop check. The puzzle is solved using queen to h5, h4, bishop takes bishop check, queen takes bishop, queen takes queen check. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using knight to a4, g4, knight takes bishop, pawn takes pawn, c7. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are pawn takes bishop, knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, queen takes rook, queen takes knight, queen takes pawn. The checks are queen takes pawn check. The best move in puzzle position is queen takes rook, bishop to e3, rook takes bishop, pawn takes rook, queen to d2. Next puzzle. Threats in this position are knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn check, rook takes pawn, rook takes rook. Checks in puzzle position are queen takes pawn check. The answer is rook takes rook, rook takes rook, knight takes pawn. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are queen takes pawn check, queen takes pawn, queen takes rook, knight takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, bishop takes pawn, rook takes pawn, rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. Queen to f7 check, queen to e8 check, queen takes pawn check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes pawn, queen to f6, Knight to g5. Queen takes knight check. Queen takes queen. Rook takes queen. Rook takes rook. Another one. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are. Rook takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using king to d5. Rook to c1. Rook to b6 check. King to h5. Rook to c6. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.